In September 1985, a British tabloid newspaper, The Sun, reported on a weird phenomenon. The Sun interviewed a Yorkshire fireman, Peter Hall, who claimed that fire brigades across the north of England began noticing that a certain portrait was frequently found among the ruins of burned houses. What is even more strange is not only were the fires caused for reasons unknown, but this portrait seemed to be the only thing untouched by the flames. The crying boy portrait was painted by Italian painter Bruno Amarillo. This portrait was mass-produced and distributed in the 1950s. There are different versions of the portrait, but all contain a tearful boy or girl. In 1981, Amarillo passed away. Many related incidents began emerging from homes that had owned the crying portrait. Dora Brand's home caught on fire 6 weeks after purchasing the portrait and was the only portrait that survived the fire. Sandra Kraski claimed that she, her sister, her mother, and her friend all bought the portrait and they were victims of house fires soon thereafter. In 1985, the following occurrences happened. The Perillo Pizza Palace had the crying boy portrait displayed in their business. Their business was gutted by fire and the only thing that remained unscathed was the portrait. The Godper family lost their home to an unexplained fire after hanging their crying boy portrait in their living room. The only portrait to survive, unmarked, the crying boy. The Amos family owned a pair of the crying portraits, which they hung in their living and dining rooms. A gas explosion destroyed the entire building, everything except the portraits. In November 1985, the following occurrences happened. One woman said her family purchased and hung their crying portrait in their home. The home went up in flames and killed her mother, her husband, her son, and her daughter in separate fire-related incidents. The only survivor every time was the crying boy portrait. Another person came home to find his own living room in flames for unknown reasons. The firemen were unable to identify the cause of the fire. The crying boy portrait survived the fire. By the end of November, widespread hysteria broke out, and the Sun newspaper organized mass bonfires to burn the paintings. However, in December 1985, firemen found the charred remains of a 67-year-old man whose home mysteriously caught on fire. Upon the investigation, it was discovered that the crying boy portrait was found intact, lying next to the man's charred body. One of the firemen who dealt with the fire was quoted as saying, quote, "I've never believed in the jinx up until now, but when you actually come across a picture in a gutted room and it's literally the only thing that hasn't been touched, it is most odd." End quote. Sometime later, British writer and comedian named Stephen Punt was intrigued by the curse of the crying boy portrait and decided to investigate. He concluded that the portrait was not cursed, but rather the prints were treated with a varnish containing fire retardant. The only portion of the portrait not flame retardant was the string used to hang the photo. During the fires, he determined that the string would catch fire, causing the portrait to fall on the floor face down, thus being protected by the elements. Seems like a plausible explanation. However, after the experiments were completed, Punt made sure to take the portraits out of the home, just in case. Is Steve Punt's theory correct that all this hysteria was built around the fact that the portrait was protected by flame retardant varnish? Is it odd that the fires seemed to begin after the death of the portrait's painter, Amarillo? What was causing all the fires in the homes? Is it merely a coincidence that the homes that caught on fire all had this portrait hanging? Or was it that the portrait was so popular, it was owned by numerous households in the area? Is there some truth behind the crying boy portrait curse? We would love to hear your thoughts, so comment below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and become part of our fearless community.